I'll be the first affirmative speaker in favor of the bill. In my opinion, I think the abolition of the mandatory death penalty is effective in attempting to reduce a wrongful execution. So, why is it effective to reduce a wrongful execution? So, I have a few points here that I can support it. So, the first point is it allows for a thorough investigation and review. So, if there's a mandatory death penalty, the judge will tend to rush into things without actually investigating thoroughly about what is actually going on in the case. And if there is an abolition of the mandatory death penalty, the court can actually investigate thoroughly on what actually happened in the case. And because of a really detailed investigation, the judge can actually give a really appropriate sentence for the criminal. And this also brings to another point where they will have more opportunities for appeal. So if the sentence is only imprisonment, like life imprisonment or just a normal sentencing of like in jail, it'll be easier for them to appeal for a lesser sentence. But however, if you got the death penalty, it will be harder for the criminal to appeal for another punishment as a judge just quickly want to end the case. And this brings us to another point where we can avoid irreversible punishment, because death penalty is something that you cannot reverse. So once you execute someone, you can't get their life back. This also brings us to another point where it also reduces emotional influence. So by abolishing the mandatory death penalty, it can reduce emotional influence on the judge part. So because usually if the person have death penalty, it will be a really, really popular case that the public will want to like just get rid of the person, you know. But if there's the abolition of the mandatory death penalty, the judge will not be influenced by any emotional reason from the public, and the judge can also give the sentence based on facts instead of the emotional pressure from the public. And next, for my last point, it also gives a greater public confidence in the legal system, because if you execute a wrong person, the public won't trust the justice system in our country anymore. So if we abolish the mandatory death sentence, there will be no wrong execution. So when there's no wrong execution, the public will be confident in our legal system. And to back it up, there's one case that the person got wrongly executed. So it's a Chicago case where it revealed that there's evidence that Texas may have executed an innocent man in 1989. However, the defendant, Carlos De Luna, was executed for the fatal stabbing of Texas convenience store clerk Wendell Wilkes in 1983. The evidence uncovered by reporters that the guilty man points towards another man, but however, the guy that got suspected has already been executed. So since there's like already real life case of a wrongful execution, why not we just abolish the mandatory death penalty? It will be better that way. So that's all for my points. Thank you.
First affirmative speaker, in your argument, you spoke about how by abolishing the mandatory death penalty, it would result in a scenario where the judge, they won't rush the execution, but they will instead just slow down and try to look at the case overall before imposing a sentence, right? How would you address the argument that regardless of whether the offense carries the mandatory death penalty or not, the judge will always take the time out to actually look at the case and try to understand what's going on?
So usually when there is a case involving a mandatory death penalty, the court will mainly focus on moving on to the next case as soon as possible instead of pursuing alternative punishment. It is because the punishment for the offense has already been prescribed before. Like the punishment for that particular offense is already in the statute saying that it will be a mandatory death penalty. So hence, that's why they will rush the process of the execution since the judge is not given the opportunity to give another punishment.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our debate today, and I'm Avilash and I'll be the first negative speaker. So I stand before you today in favor of the position that the death penalty ought to remain, and how it plays a crucial role in construing a bright and safe society for all of us. Now, according to an article published by FMT on 14 November 2018, it clearly states that the death penalty is still needed when a country is afflicted with crimes that can create fear among citizens. Now, I mean no offense to anyone here, but all those who support the abolition of the death penalty should really reconsider your stand. The government has a duty to curb crime, and our legal framework shall provide them with the necessary tools to do so. Now, I know everyone here might have been influenced by human rights activists, but just to be clear, in this country, nobody has been given a death penalty where it's not deserved. They will first have to go through a lengthy trial where only with accordance with the law and the constitution, when the offender is found that beyond reasonable doubt that in fact he is guilty, will he be sentenced to death. Now, I would ask one question. What is the main purpose of a justice system? Is to provide justice. A study conducted by Kaur and Richard Tewksbury in 2013 regarding how families feel following the execution of their loved ones illustrates on how many families feel that the death penalty is a form of justice. It holds the perpetrator accountable for their actions and provides a sense of closure to the victims of the family. Besides that, for some, the execution of the murderer can offer emotional relief, alleviating feelings of grief and anger. Now, the reason they feel this is not exactly for retribution or revenge. They simply just feel this so no one else will have to feel what they had gone through. Now, I would like to just bring up a few names here. First, Len Davis, a New Orleans police officer, was ordered the murder of a young black woman. Now, did she deserve the death penalty? I would have to say so. But however, another one, Daniel Troya and Ricardo Sanchez Jr., they murdered a couple and their kids. Now, if these people do not deserve the death penalty, then I do not know what to say. Moreover, the death penalty ensures public safety by permanently removing these most dangerous offenders from society. When we think of victims, like the families of mass shooting or the loved ones of horrific violence, we have to ask ourselves, are we to risk allowing these individuals to continue living among us as a part of our society? For example, John McCrae was sentenced to death for the murder of an 8-year-old boy. He was a pedophile, but he was paroled in 1971. You know what he did when he came out? He convicted another murder of another child. Now, another one, John Miller, in 1957. He killed an infant and he was paroled in 1975 only to come out of prison and kill his own parents. The death penalty guarantees that these criminals cannot cause any more harm. We owe it to the victims who have suffered or have died to ensure that their sufferings are acknowledged. And with that, I end my
First negative speaker, in your argument, you claim that the purpose of the law, the justice system, and to a certain extent the purpose of establishing the mandatory death penalty is for justice for the victim, justice for their families, right? How would you address the concern that imposing the mandatory death penalty might result in injustice on part of the accused?
Okay, so as I've said, for the death penalty to be passed, a lengthy trial is gone by to ensure that beyond reasonable doubt, they are in fact guilty of the crime they have committed. And what I mean by justice is not again just for revenge. It's actually to ensure that no one else has to suffer the same loss. Many people have suffered this, and with the death penalty, we have to ensure that no one else around, even the whole world, no one else has to suffer what these victims have already suffered.
Hi everyone, my name is Amrita and I'm the second affirmative speaker. I strongly stand for the fact that the death penalty should be abolished. To start off, it ensures fairness and equality in sentencing. Although it is agreeable that in justice, the severity of the punishment should correspond to the seriousness of the crime committed. However, implementing the mandatory death penalty disrupts this balance. For example, as reported by Amnesty Malaysia, currently there are 906 individuals set to be on death row as of September 2023, 415 individuals actually being foreign nationals. And 67.5% of these inmates are convicted of drug trafficking under Section 39B of the Dangerous Drugs Act 1952. It is important to remember that not all crimes under the same category are equally as serious. However, both may end up resulting in getting sentenced the mandatory death penalty. For example, one could be an individual intentionally smuggling drugs in, and another one could just be a person at the wrong place and wrong time being accused for it. Therefore, giving a blanket punishment creates a risk of over-punishment. Another example is in like a murder case where the accomplice may actually face the same sentence as the murderer, and that's not fair at all. A lot of factors actually have to be taken into account before sentencing a person or giving them a punishment. This is because some may be too young to comprehend the severity of their crimes. They could be forced into it and they couldn't understand how serious the nature of it is. Some others may have mental health issues and are of unsound mind, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, which makes them act in weird ways. When all factors are actually considered, the judge can then impose sentences that reflect each individual's blameworthiness. This further promotes the equality in sentencing. Coming to my second point, it helps promote rehabilitation and gives those deserving a second chance so that every individual can evolve over time. As I've stated, certain individuals commit crimes because of negative environments internally and externally. They may face poverty, they may have trauma, they may have addiction issues, and even bad influences from other people around them. However, with the right interventions in jail, such as counseling, education, and restorative justice programs, they can change and develop as a better human being. They can have more remorse, empathy, awareness, and take more responsibility. Prisons Director General Datuk Nordin Muhammad said that inmate rehabilitation must be continued in our country because it has had a positive effect, and it is improving at a 17.6% rate every year. After rehab, these inmates can further become advocates and mentors for other prisoners, and they can contribute to various social causes that help deter future crime. So abolishing the death penalty allows the system to evaluate whether the individual is capable of rehab and change and may be given a lower sentence instead. If not, there is clearly no opportunity for them to take any accountability, seek forgiveness and redemption. The objective for this is to ensure that each case is evaluated individually, considering each unique circumstance and rather than applying just an overall punishment. So judges in this case can regain the ability to tailor sentences to the specifics of each case, and it allows the justice system to differentiate cases of varying severity, the intent, the culpability, and ensures that all the punishments are appropriate and just. It further prevents scenarios where individuals with vastly different levels of responsibility receive the same extreme sentence. In conclusion, the passing of this bill and abolishing the death penalty aids in restoring the judicial discretion, and it helps us achieve a more balanced approach to justice in our country. That's all from me. Thank you.
Second affirmative speaker, in your argument seems to be centered around the theme of having empathy for the individual. How would you address the concern that sometimes society needs to have strong punishments for certain offences so that they can feel safe, so that they can see that the government is being tough on crime, so that they can have the assurance that the government is actually doing what it takes to keep these people off the streets?
In my opinion, first off, retaining the death penalty for deterrence, it conflicts with standards of international human rights. Having empathy for these individuals does not mean we abandon justice or the need for our society to feel safe. But we must acknowledge the complexity of human behavior and also include the possibility for them to go through rehabilitation and change. Justice can be served without resorting to all these rigid one-fits-all size punishments, and society can emphasize on preventive and rehabilitation approaches instead, like counter-terrorism measures, or you can introduce social policies aimed at reducing radicalization and improve our intelligence and law systems as well to contribute more to long-term societal safety. So ultimately, the goal is to really find a balance between the need for deterrence and also the respect for the human life itself.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Hashvindip Singh Sohan, and I'll be continuing to speak for the position of opposing the motion of abolishing the mandatory death penalty. Malaysia's death penalty has often been applied to drug-related offences, which are considered serious crimes under Malaysian law. Some argue that the removal of the death penalty for these crimes may embolden drug traffickers or organised crime, as the penalties would no longer seem as severe. Syndicates that operate in circulating drugs throughout the country thrive by selling their substances to teenagers and young adults. These unsuspecting victims are often trying to chase a high by participating in club culture and other related activities, and they are especially at risk as they are prone to experimenting with other substances outside of alcohol. This can have potentially fatal consequences. Aside from that, there's also the crisis of opioid usage, in which addiction to such substances can absolutely ruin a person's life. This crisis is only further exacerbated by these drug traffickers, and therefore appropriate punishment should be assigned to these unscrupulous individuals. The fear of a severe punishment, such as the death penalty, currently makes people at least think twice before participating in the drug trade. But the abolishment of it would give society the impression that it is not that serious of an issue and would cause a surge in drug-related crimes. Drug-related crimes come with severe social and economic repercussions, and the death penalty is viewed as a means of protecting society from the widespread harm caused by drug addiction and any such related crimes. The statistics on drug-related cases involving the offence of supplying drugs and positive urine tests showed an increase of 30.6%, recording 141,000 cases in 2022 compared to the 108,000 cases in 2021. You cannot possibly suggest that abolishing the mandatory death penalty is the correct course of action when it could deepen the fractures in this country that was caused by drug-related crimes. Another issue is regarding prison overcrowding, which is an issue that Malaysia is already struggling with. 60 prisons nationwide are currently housing approximately 75,000 inmates, which far surpasses the capacity limit of 71,000 prisoners. The abolishment of death penalty for the most heinous crimes would most likely result in a long prison sentence being administered instead, with the longest being a life sentence. This would cause prisons to further be overcrowded, eroding away at the resources of the Malaysian government and increasing the financial strain on our country. One could argue that everyone deserves a second chance, and rehabilitation of these criminals is a more humane course of action. But for individuals convicted of the most serious crimes like drug trafficking and murder, rehabilitation can be extremely challenging. After all, how do you intend to rehabilitate someone who could knowingly take a life or to be involved in circulating dangerous drugs that have the potential to slowly ruin people? Housing such individuals would mean expending funds and resources our country simply could be using for actual functioning law-abiding members of our society to better their lives and provide opportunities for the less fortunate to actually make a change to our future. Thank you.
Second negative speaker, in your arguments, you emphasize a lot on the issue of drug trafficking and how the idea of a mandatory death penalty will help to reduce the issue of drug trafficking and how it affects the victims, those that have consumed drugs, right? So my question to you is that how would imposing the mandatory death penalty help to address the issue of a miscarriage of justice, where a wrongful conviction is imposed and the judge they do not have a choice but to impose a death penalty on the accused?
One of the first steps we can take to avoid a miscarriage of justice would be to ensure better representation of clients. So by ensuring access to competent legal representation for defendants facing capital punishment is absolutely essential. Many cases that involve miscarriage of justice often have poor defendants who cannot afford quality legal defense. Another method would be to have independent review and oversight, which can be done by establishing independent commissions or review boards to examine death penalty cases that can help identify errors or misconduct that could lead to wrongful convictions. Another one is an appeal process, which expands and improves the appeal process, which works on expanding and improving the appeal process that gives these convicts additional opportunities to contest wrongful convictions, present new evidence, or point out potential procedural errors.
Hey everyone, my name is Alistair, and today I will be doing the rebuttal and conclusion for the affirmative team. Now, to basically summarize the arguments put forth by the affirmative team, we should abolish the mandatory death penalty because it reduces the risk of wrongful execution by giving the judge more time to look at the individual cases, and two, that it helps to ensure that there is fairness and equality in the sentencing process by taking into account individuals' circumstance. Now, to address the arguments put forth by the defense team, basically the arguments that you guys have put forth, it basically centers around the idea of deterrence and retribution for murder offences and drug offences. Now, for the drug offences, unfortunately, it's the government, they sort of imposed a moratorium on drug offences back in 2017, so I can't really address it because the drug offences, death penalty for drug offences is not really in the bill. But for murder offences, I shall address that. So the whole idea of having having deterrence as the underlying idea for murder offences, right? It doesn't take into account the fact that murder is considered, most of the time, is considered as a crime of passion. So deterrence is mainly used for premeditated offences where you really have time to think about how you're going to plan to commit that offence. But most murders are crime of passion. They're committed in the spur of the moment and they don't really think about the consequences of their action. So the whole idea of maintaining the mandatory death penalty in order to reduce the crime rate for murder in society is kind of moot. It doesn't really have a point because most murders are crimes of passion instead of premeditated crimes. Now, for the idea of retribution, again, I'm going to reiterate the affirmative team's arguments, which is that you guys didn't really address the points that the mandatory death penalty fails to take into account individual circumstance for the judge in handing out the death sentence. So you guys didn't really address the argument head on. Yeah, so that is my rebuttal and conclusion okay, so to basically just sum up my rebuttal in a nutshell, drug offences, it's not in the bill, and for murder offences, it doesn't really help for deterrence because it's a crime of passion, and regarding the aspect of retribution, it doesn't take into account individual circumstance, having empathy for the accused. That is my rebuttal and conclusion in a nutshell. Thank you very much. As to the rebuttal and conclusion for the defense team, I will start by summarizing their arguments first. Basically, the arguments put forth by the negative team, it focuses on the themes of deterrence and retribution for murder and drug-related offences. Basically, the idea that by imposing the mandatory death penalty for murder offences, we reduce the crime rate for murder and drug offences in society. And the idea of retribution, the idea that we need that of having a sense of balance. Whatever offence it is that the accused has done to the victim, the government, through the judiciary, will impose a similar kind of punishment on the accused. That is deterrence and retribution in a nutshell. Now, to address the arguments put forth by the affirmative team, basically, the arguments put forth by the affirmative team, they center around the idea of judicial discretion. By reducing the risk of wrongful execution by giving the judge time to look at the case, that is judicial discretion, and by ensuring fairness and equality in sentencing, which in and of itself has the element of judicial discretion to it. Now, my rebuttal is that judicial discretion sometimes can be a double-edged sword. Even though we may remove the mandatory death penalty for certain offences, it might not stop the judge from just simply handing out the death penalty because they have the discretion to do so, and sometimes the sentencing process is not that transparent. So the judge, they can just give out the death penalty and they don't really have to think twice about it. This is backed up by a study conducted by the Monash University Death Penalty Project that looks at the moratorium imposed by the government for drug-related offences. Even though the government, they imposed the moratorium from 2016 to 2020, the number of prisoners put on death row for drug-related offences, it still increased from like 600 to like almost 800, 799 to be exact. So giving judges the discretion whether to impose the death penalty or not does not necessarily mean that the judge, they are going to not impose the mandatory death penalty. Sometimes the judge, using their own discretion, they won't take into account individual circumstance and they will just simply hand out the death penalty. So to basically sum up my rebuttal to the affirmative team, the affirmative team fails to address the idea of the human element of judges, the possibility that judges are biased, and by giving them the discretion to decide whether to impose the mandatory death penalty or not, it does not necessarily accomplish the objectives that is set out by the abolishment of the mandatory death penalty bill because of judicial discretion. That is my rebuttal and conclusion in a nutshell. Thank you very much.